Because she's really bossy. Okay, now it's your turn. Yeah, just who are you and where are you? This is a really formal presentation. Your name is?
I'm Ness.
And you're from?
Grand Rapids.
Are you working? Are you?
Oh, I'm in 7th grade. I'm just here with my sister.
Awesome. Perfect. We're so glad you're here. And your sister is who?
That's me. My name is Eva Jensen. I work at Disability Advocates of Kent County.
You next?
You next.
All right, I'm Jim Giller. I work with Experience Owner, and I just completed my SLP training, but I haven't been mentored yet. But I'm looking forward.
Very nice. Oh, now they're running back. Next, sir.
I'm Zach Oster. I'm a student of sociology at Grand Valley State University.
I'm Ashley Dykeman. I'm also a student at Grand Valley.
Megan Stevens, and I'm also a student at Grand Valley.
It's Liliana Phipps, and I'm also a student at Grand Valley.
Michael Jones, and I'm also a student at Grand Valley.
Don't worry, it's not just the sociologists who are here.
I'm Ann Cluding. I also have a degree in sociology from Michigan State, but I work for Kent Regional Force.
And in the middle?
I'm an SLP student at Grand Valley.
And SLP means?
Speech and language pathology.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paige. I'm a speech and language pathology student at GE as well.
And who are the three of you, please?
Becca Walsh-Wolf. I coordinate Reading is Fundamental for Grand Rapids Public Schools.
Jane DeGroot, the other one, and I work for the Literacy Center as the coordinator for the Customized Workplace English program. I'm representing Sister Carmen, who is director of Word ESL. My name is Pat Will. I'm a tutor there.
All right, well, the last six are our panelists, and I'm not going to go in order with them.
Therese? I'm Therese Smith. I work with Comprehensive Therapy Center. We help children with disabilities walk, talk, learn, and play so they can read and write.
And I work with her, and I work at Grand Valley, so I have a split personality. Taking people out of order, and in no alphabetical or anything, but since Mary is the host of this greetings the meeting this afternoon, you get to tell us who you are and a little bit about the agency that you work.
Okay. My name is Mary Rozendal, and I am the owner, director of Encourage Institute for Teaching and Learning. I came to this point kind of by a very circuitous route. I was originally a teacher, special education, general education, music, and then did my graduate work at Michigan State in special education, and went on from there to be a university professor at the University of Missouri Columbia, and then at SUNY Buffalo. I adopted a son from Ukraine, which we're a little nervous about what's going on there, over there right now, but and decided that we needed to come back to where my family was. I'm originally from West Michigan, so we came back here, and I opened up a private practice, and we have been growing in the last 7 years. And if you stop by our new location down at the end of the hall, we are just moving in. We have another location that is in Granville. So we do developmental therapy, and specifically autism interventions for early interventions, play-based treatments, and then also educational therapy, where we're taking students that have a variety of learning difficulties, learning disabilities, and putting together a comprehensive intervention program for them. And I'm on the board of directors for the National Association of Educational Therapists, but I'm only the second one in Michigan, so we're growing, but it's an approach that has a real strong base in the coast, so California and the East Coast. California is actually in the process of getting a state certification for educational therapy. And I can talk to you more about that at some other point, but we're really excited to have you here, and I want to thank the U.S. Department of Agriculture for letting us use their room.
So thank you for hosting. This was just lovely of you. So I'm going to do, we're going to go in reverse alphabetical order. The pressure is on Amy because you get to go last.
That's nice.
Katherine, will you tell us who you are and what you do?
My name is Katherine Pegman, and I am the director of the Children's Dyslexia Center of West Michigan. And we're one of 3 of the dyslexia centers in Michigan. We're serving all of West Michigan, but we're part of a national organization that provides free one-on-one tutoring to students that have been diagnosed with dyslexia. So we do free after-school tutoring using the Orton-Gillingham approach.
Joy.
I am Joy Oosterhouse. I am a teacher consultant for comprehensive therapy. What that involves is basically doing assessments for learning disabilities in a lot of our client schools. We get referrals, and I do the assessment achievement piece to the assessment piece.
I put numbers down, so as long as I follow my numbers, I should be okay. Denise.
Hi, I'm Denise Joseph, and I am a retired special education teacher consultant. I retired from Comstock Park Schools, where I was for many, many years. I've served in the field of special education since before Public Act 194 was even there. I grew up with special education. I grew up in it. I had an endorsement in EILD and cognitively impaired. I kind of lived and breathed special ed for many, many years, and then I retired, and now I am I got my TESOL certificate because I wanted to do something different, and so now I tutor adults in English. So I kind of do a little bit of, I have watched a lot of young people with learning disabilities grow up and become very successful adults. And because I was in the district, it was a small district, and I was there for a long time, and I wore many, many hats. I was able to have my own personal longitudinal studies of children who I had in the 2nd and 3rd grade, and then who went on and then came back as adults, and we would talk about what we did right, what we did wrong. So I have a lot of perspective on it.
Thank you, Leah.
Hello, I'm Leah Carpenter, and I am a, how should I put it?
Professional volunteer.
Professional volunteer. And I'm an adult of learning disabilities. So I have ADHD, dyslexia, and a reading disability. So I have lived it my whole life, raised in public schools in the 60s and the 70s in Muskegon Heights. So I have been that child who struggled with the system, against the system, and now am working to reform the system, that every child can learn. We have to change to help them learn, not they have to change to learn.
Well, thank you. And the last panelist is Amy Berto.
I'm Amy Barto, and my tag says SLD Read. For 2 more weeks, we're Specialized Language Development Center. That's way too long to remember, so we just go with SLD Read and you're good. I've been there for about 2.5 years. I'm our community outreach director. I've lived and breathed learning disabilities since I got out of college, so I get to say now long enough. That's what I've decided. That's how I just age myself. It's long enough. And previously to SLD, I was the executive director and a teacher at Lake Michigan Academy, which is a private school for kids with learning disabilities and ADHD. I adjuncted Aquinas in the LD program as well. So I've worked with K through adult with learning disabilities and without. And I'm the mom of a 12-year-old successful child with dyslexia in Grand Rapids Public Schools.
So thank you all. I have a list of questions that they've received, but since I think this is a rather informal discussion, so if you have questions that you can't stand to wait till the end, write them down, send them over to me, raise your hand, whatever you want to do. My first question, and then you can all decide who wants to answer it first, is what's the appropriate way to talk about learning disabilities?
Out loud.
Out loud.
I tend to be the sassy one in the group, sorry, but one of the things that tends to happen is learning disabilities tend to be not talked about, and I think that's navigate. I think the challenge becomes within the term disability, it seems to be a negative connotation, but that's more for the recognition that there are rights that are involved with that. It's a different kind of processing than the traditional. So whether you call it a challenge, whether you call it a disability, whether you call it a gift, all of those things are appropriate, and knowing that you're still talking about a person, for me, tends to be the key to that discussion.
I like to, when I work with little people and we talk about her challenges, I like to start with your strengths. I always start with strengths, and this is what I'm good at, and then this is what I need to work on, this is what I'm challenged with, this is what I struggle with. But, and honesty, because that gets to be difficult as a child gets to be in middle school and high school. Yeah, and so I like to be honest when they're little and just grow up in a culture of honesty, have them grow up. I have 3 children, adult children, and my middle son has learning disabilities, and I laugh because he would always say, I'm not one of your kids, I'm not one of your kids, Mom, and he would get angry with me, especially in middle school and high school. But no, I start with, we talk about what you're good at, and then what you need help with.
Okay. Katherine.
Something that I learned through my coursework that was kind of profound was that in terms of labeling, I don't like the label to come first, so I don't refer to them as dyslexic kids. They're kids with dyslexia. So first recognizing them as individuals and people first, and they have dyslexia. So I think that's kind of a powerful way to think about it. But I also take the lead from the families that we work with. You know, how they have been accustomed to dealing with either labeling or not labeling. I mean, sometimes it's powerful to have that assessment and that label, and some people are looking for, we just want this identified so we know what to call it so that we can get the resources that we need and, you know, the help that we need. So just working on an individual basis really with the perceptions that families come in with and how to talk about that and what they're comfortable with and things like that for what's best for their child.
Joy.
I think having at this stage is also, I was going to say, she was talking about strengths and weaknesses, and that's how we are also identifying the issue as well. When we assess a child, it's now gone to a much more strength and weaknesses profile, rather than scores and percentiles. I mean, we do have that as well, but we look much stronger at, we have to have so many strengths in this area and so many weaknesses in this area.
Mary.
Well, and I think what you're also finding is there is a little bit of a difference between who you're talking to when you're talking about learning disabilities, because from a school they have a particular category that allows for special education services, and there are specific criteria that are met, the patterns of strengths and weaknesses, or there are different ways that someone becomes eligible for services in that category. But then there's also a clinical definition, and oftentimes the two don't talk to each other very well. And people who have, you know, who see a psychologist or who see a neuropsychologist and get more of a clinical definition, which tends to be dyslexia or tends to be some of the names that we hear associated with learning disabilities, those oftentimes don't translate very well into a school setting for kids. And so negotiating the understandings of what does this actually mean for different people and who's talking about it is really critical.
And I purposely saved Leah for last, because how do you prefer people to talk about learning disabilities?
Just as a person with different personalities, you know, somebody has a bubbly personality, somebody is withdrawn, some people are withdrawn, you know, some people are go-getters and leaders. People with learning disabilities have other abilities. When when you're dealing with kids, especially like with ADD, ADHD, you know, they're all over the place. So how do you help, how do you use that energy? How do you, encourage them to use the energy that they have and focus on 3 or 4 different things in the classroom or in their learning, so that it's not like, would you sit down? Would you sit down? Would you sit down? But more so, could you get up and go do so-and-so? Could you pass out those pencils, those rulers? Because you know that person already has the energy and is not going to sit down very well. Use the abilities and the gifts that they have, which we call disabilities, but it's their personal abilities, to the benefit of the classroom and to them. If that's what, if they have the energy, send them down to the office to go get that stack of papers from Miss Smith, or, that type of thing. So I would love to see children more identified for their abilities than their disabilities.
Talk to us more about it. Talk to us more about how you'd like us to understand what it means to have a learning disability.
It's one of those things where, so if you had a child who had Down syndrome, you talk to them for maybe 2 minutes and you realize it. Okay, so that person, a person with different type of disabilities, as myself, you talk to me, you wouldn't know. Now, if I had to write a paper right now, you'd notice, why is she taking so long? What is she doing? Why is she, But when you have a certain type of disability that's not physically obvious, it takes people by surprise. But it is not, I don't know how to explain it. It's they shouldn't be boxed in. They shouldn't be, boxed in and labeled. For me, if you, and what has always been true, if I say, how do you spell so-and-so? And you spell it to me, it looks like alphabet soup. You all remember alphabet soup? Remember alphabet soup in a bowl? So in my mind, that's what I see. A bowl of letters just floating around. They do not come in order, as you said it to me. So for me, I need some resources. I need some tricks. I need some things that can get around the obstacles that I might have, but I don't need you to announce it to the whole room or to the whole world, So as a teacher or as an assessor, as you see the different struggles that I might have, figure out resources I could use.
So what else does having a learning disability mean to any of you?
Well, I think it's important to also keep in mind that it's not just in school. I mean, somebody that has a difficult time processing language, or they don't understand how people are, the signals or the information gets mixed up in some way. That doesn't stop when they leave the school building. This is something that's impacting their whole life, and I want to make sure that when I'm working with kids or I'm working with parents on behalf of children, we look a bit holistically at, well, what is the impact of this in other things that you're doing outside of school, because it's not just something that impacts school, although that's a major part of it.
Amy?
I find that it really, there's different layers, because it completely depends on where you're experiencing it. Because I know for me, I've experienced it as an adult with ADHD, with my students, with different ages, with friends, with peers, with colleagues, as a teacher and as a mom. And the one thing that I've always found is that when you're talking about speaking about gifts and abilities, every gift can be a challenge, every challenge can be a gift. Are they stubborn or are they perseverant? Because in many climates, perseverant is very important. But in other climates, it's called stubborn. So it depends on which one you're doing at that given point in time. And I find it's perspective is what it really is. If we all had the exact same perspective, the world would never change. So for me, I approach my kids that way. I want you to have different perspectives on things and be able to communicate about that, which means I need to treat you like I actually expect you to have different perspectives of things. So for my 12-year-old in particular, I consider, you know, what is it? It's the way their brain works. And mine works differently than that, and it's a good reason. And the more I can refer to their brain, the less I refer to their personality, the less it's their fault. And when I'm communicating with parents, I find that to be a very, very big, important piece. It's never it's not a fault. It just is. And my favorite statement when I'm really getting going is, you know, has anybody ever used a sticky note? Ever? Use the internet at all? Use a cell phone? Use an Apple ever? Those were all created by people with learning disabilities. You have to have that creativity or the world stays the same. So for me, it's lack of boredom.
Katherine.
Yeah, it's interesting the families that we work with, I mean, and every individual is different, and so are the families, you know, and how receptive they are, like we were talking about earlier, ways to talk about learning disabilities, and then how do they feel about having learning disability, you know, whether they are on that, you know, gift side of it or challenge side of it, what's their ownership of it, you know, what are they choosing to do with that, how are they internalizing it, and also for the families too, you know, accepting, you know, their different child, you know, because thank goodness, I always say thank goodness everybody's brain isn't created the same, right? So that's how we present it also, is that, you know, your brain's designed differently, and thank goodness it is, because you've got great things that you're going to give the world that other people, you know, might not have thought of, and things like that. So it's really, that's not necessarily the focus of what we do at our center specifically, but that's part of the human piece of it, is talking to them and, you know, have they digested this, or are they processing it, and what does that mean for them and their family? And for the parents, you know, they have these ideas, and maybe it means rethinking and refocusing maybe some of the goals that they had for their kids, you know, and it's also helping the kids find their strengths and what they might like to do, you know, with that, and where they see their potential, and where are those challenges, and where do we come in, you know, to start to help address some of those, because we're focused on trying to make that hard work a little bit easier so that they can unlock their potential and get to where they're more capable of realizing their goals that they have.
Joy.
I think I get frustrated. I sit through a lot of IETs, and it gets very frustrating to have this wonderfully unique child with all kinds of gifts, and you have to get them to fit into this school system setting and rules and regulations, and we can't do this and we can't do that kind of thing. I think that's very frustrating. I think it's frustrating for the parents. I think it's frustrating for the child. I just was thinking, I got a picture on Facebook. I had a child from kindergarten, and he is now a grown adult, and he just had a baby boy. And we had so many meetings on that boy. You know, how is this child ever going to get through school? But we took we adjusted program constantly. We had parents who were very realistic. We tapped into his strengths. And I think as for people with disabilities, we need to be looking at that. How can we adjust things so that we don't have to fit them into this rigid school setting kind of thing? And I think kids feel that. I see kids feeling that they get frustrated to that.
Denise.
I think that we're fortunate to have the tools, the technology tools that we have now in 2014. We're fortunate to have a better understanding and a better acceptance of people that learn differently. You know, when all that work was done on multiple intelligences, and people started conversations about, okay, you can be book smart, you can be word smart, you can be people smart, you can be gymnastics smart, you know, and we had kids talking like that. We had, so I think those are all good things. I think we've come a long way. I used to, when I started, I used to have to I felt like I had to bake cookies for teachers to let me read tests to kids. That was back in the 70s, 80s. But what I'm saying is we've come a long way because now at the university, because now young teachers come out. I was able to experience a shift when I would work with teachers who would say, what accommodations do I need to make, Denise? You know, and that was a gift. That was amazing to me. But then on the other hand, the curriculum and everything has just gotten so tight. Like what we used to teach in kindergarten, what we used to teach in second grade, we now teach in kindergarten. And so I'm astounded by the skill sets that little people need. And so many of our kids who struggle, you know, if they're in third grade and they're just learning the short vowel patterns and consonant, vowel, consonant words, you know, so they're always behind. And it's not fun to be behind. And it's not fun to come to school every day and have to do something that you're not good at. And that wears on a child's psyche. And that's why it's just, you know, a child with a learning disability, or I like to say learning difference, but has to have a successful, the ones that do well have a lot of people in their court. They have a lot of people in their camp. They have grandmas, they have aunts and uncles, they have people, brothers and sisters who are with them, because it takes a lot of energy on a part of a school, of a teacher, and a classroom, and on the part of a family, and on the part of an agency that will. I used to have students that I would send to your program, and your program was wonderful, and it's important to work for the teacher to work with the ancillary program, or the program that's being offered after school or in the summer. But it really takes a village, I really believe. And then somehow we have to teach our little people tenacity and toughness. You know, we just can't give up. Because it's amazing to me, you know, the kids with learning disabilities who go to college and how much more they have to work to study for a test than a kid that doesn't struggle. You know, and in my own family, my own children, you have one that struggles and you have one that learns like that. And that's hard for that one that struggles to see the one that learns like that, and that's like not fair, and how come, you know, what's wrong with me? But anyway, so I'm sorry, I probably didn't even answer the question.
That works for me.
Yeah. All right, those are just my thoughts.
Yeah. And then to write an IEP, okay, you're not good at this, and you're gonna come to this room and spend 45 minutes every day doing something that you hate and you're not good at.
You'll be happy.
I wouldn't want to go to school either.
Yeah.
One thing that they used to do in my elementary school, only a few of you will remember these things. It was a projector. You put the film in, and it moved. And so I was in a cubicle, a little cubicle, with the projector. And words would come across the back of the cubicle. Faster and faster. And this was teaching me to read. No. It was teaching me how to be bored in that cubicle and nod off, or look at the words and say, okay, if you go faster, I can read you. Nope. So it was just, you know, some of the things that they tried back then. And I guess for me, my hope is to see education reform in public school education. You know, that every child be given that platform of learning and early, so that they can be a part of the discussion of society and issues and so forth. So why can't a child study algebra and paint at the same time, or play an instrument and hear a book on history at the same time? Because an ADD child can do that. they can sit and paint, but listen to a chapter on the Napoleon era, whereas they will probably pay more attention to it than if they had to you know, sit and look at somebody talking about a little short dude. So that's the type of thing. I would love to see the schools change for the children, and not the children have to change for the school. And I think that's straight across the board, even for the children who do well and do easy. Where's the creativity part of the school day that does help those synapses, you know, flow and connect even better? Where's the music and the arts and the dance and, you know, even gymnastics and different sports that help children just develop their mind and their thinking and their thoughts more in the school day, more freedom, you know. I'm going to chemistry lab and see what chemicals react with them. And you know what I'm saying? When they come out of the room, they might just be saying, well, the blue one made the orange one bubble, but the red one made the blue one explode. But now they have some understanding of chemical reactions, and then now you can get down into what they are and why they do the things that they do.
Okay, so for me, we have the suggestion that we should change the school to meet the child and not the child to meet the school.
Yes.
And I need one or two, because I know you all have many of them, suggestions that you would give to literacy providers who are working with children with learning differences. Who wants to venture in that next?
Well, I think actually, like, some of the things Leah was saying relates directly back to that in my head, in the sense of when she's saying about that cubicle and the words going by. For some kids, that's great practice, and for some, it's not. And I think one of the biggest pieces that, whether it's a literacy provider, an interventionist, a parent, no matter who it is, the biggest piece is the same thing does not always work for every kid. And it doesn't always work at the same time. So it depends on what you're using it for. And I think one of the parts of being not in a hurry, but really looking at things, is trying to find that one thing that I can use with a bunch of people because it's just easier and feels more efficient. But then I'm always going to end up with the kids it doesn't work for, and they're going to be stuck because I've just used it in the same way every time. So, you know, or if it's being really used for that purpose. So I mean, one of them is, for me, is just make sure that you have multiple tools and that you're really thinking about what the purpose of the tool is. And know that today it might not work, tomorrow it might, and that's okay. You know, keeping the measure of that. Part of learning disabilities is that inconsistency, as opposed to just not knowing something, and that's actually part of that tracking. I think the second thing is, one thing that Katherine had mentioned that's really important is that people-centered language. You know, any kind of a disability or a trait, any of those pieces isn't actually an adjective. It just happens to come along with that. So a person with dyslexia is it's very different than when we think about perception of a dyslexic child. It's not an adjective for that child. That very busy, creative, sometimes irritating child might have dyslexia, might not. But there's definitely a difference in the phrasing piece.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's important to understand where the difficulty lies. What I'm seeing right now in schools is they're trying to do so many assessments, and they're doing these, you know, benchmark types of assessments for reading, for example. And these benchmarks assessments are asking kids to read, and they're measuring fluency. Well, fluency, if you look at what fluency is, fluency being the end product of good decoding, good comprehension, and these different facets. Just because someone doesn't score well on a fluency measure doesn't tell you why. And we're doing so much to try and get kids to read faster. You know, you talked about the words flashing. We're trying to get them to read whole paragraphs and things faster, as if that is the intervention. When in fact we've got to do a little bit more investigation. You know, why is there a difficulty reading? And ask those questions. As a teacher, you can observe, because there are different patterns that you will see. I think the diagnostic work that has to be done has to actually go and investigate. what the difficulty is for the particular child. Because like people are saying, and like Amy was saying too, every intervention is not going to work for every child because every child's going to have their own nuanced way of thinking. So that's the one thing to think about. And the other thing that has also been mentioned here before is the fact that there's a lot of research being done right now using the brain scan technology, and Marianne Wolf's research at Tufts University and Sally Shaywit's research at the things that they're finding out right now about how the brain learns and how a brain learns for someone who has dyslexia, vision processing or auditory versions of it, or in Europe they're doing the same type of research on mathematics, and they're finding out that it isn't necessarily a deficit, something's not working. It's that the brain is thinking about things in a unique way. And in order for us to really capture and make decisions about, do we need to support the brain to have different ways about thinking of words, or do we need interventions that just help with coping and giving support for using strengths? We need to make better decisions, and there's so much that's being done right now that we need to do a little bit more investigation and figuring some of those things out.
Denise?
I think sometimes we forget to ask the child or the adult, the client, what accommodations work for you and what don't. Sometimes we just slap on accommodations that aren't really needed and sometimes not even helpful. I always like to ask a child, do you want to read it out loud? Do you want to read it to yourself? You want to, you have to, and that goes along with that honesty when they're little, but always talking about their learning, dialoguing about their learning, and what, I think that's important to make that child help him or her master or take charge of his or her own learning and what. Now it takes a long time, that's a process, but sometimes we forget, and sometimes what used to really bother me is sometimes we would over accommodate, and we would I don't know, take away. I don't think we can take away failure from children with learning disabilities. I don't think we can own their failure. I think they have to have a right to fail like every other person, because I think you learn from failures. You can't make everything safe and secure and sweet, but you do have to, always be dialoguing and be honest.
Joy.
On that note, I think in the past I would always, recommend what motivates the child, what are his strengths, pull tools in when necessary. But the Prostic Center of Pasadena, California has come out with a pretty impressive study that they set personality traits, and they have found that if they focus on these personality traits, students with learning disabilities are much more successful overall in life. And they focused on self-awareness, proactivity, perseverance, goal setting, the present of having support systems, and emotional coping strategies. And adults that they did use that with turned out to be more highly functioning adults in society. So now I'm rethinking what recommendations I would make, because I guess maybe I would start looking at focusing on, pulling all those characteristics in.
Can you quote that, where you got the article from?
Prostic. It's a Prostic Center, Pasadena.
The what center?
The Prostic.
Oh, Prostic, yeah, I'm sorry. I think to echo what Amy and Mary were saying earlier, they kind of go hand in hand, looking at that diagnostic piece and saying, okay, so maybe we don't have a great fluency score here, but let's dig a little deeper. What does that really mean? Looking at that diagnostic piece, so then we can individualize the instruction for the person, what's going to maybe work the best, things like that. That really takes experience and education on the part of the literacy provider. So I think there's a responsibility there for the literacy provider to get adequate training and knowledge and understanding about how do we, interpret these diagnostic pieces of information that we have, and what do we know about accommodations and methods of interventions, so that we can tailor something individual to this child, you know, to have maximum benefit for this individual. So I think it goes back to really getting as much good information and training as you can, so that you can be that literacy provider that the kids need.
Joy, spell frosting. Is it?
Frostig.
They left, they must have been sold.
Your class.
Sorry. Thanks.
Oh, they're pulling the vegan class card.
It was nothing personal. We have about 15 minutes left. I have one more question on the an early agenda, but I'd like to make this more inclusive, and we can end with types of learning disabilities. So the first question, hot off the presses, and I don't, this is the first I've heard about this. So the states are far behind Europe in disability movement, and is there talk of accessible language or easy read infographics in mainstream education to translate materials? I don't know.
Ooh, I don't know. I have not heard any discussions in mainstream education, but I don't know if I've.
So tell us about it.
Basically, what I do is I translate materials into being accessible for a variety of disabilities, and I work for the Developmental Disability Council in Lansing through a 5-year grant right now, traveling around Michigan. So what they were struggling with is how to give information to their constituents with high and complex needs, and it wasn't effective the way they were doing it. So I think someone was mentioning music, that's where originally I started getting into the translating into accessible language, the connection between music, because I used to be a music teacher. So basically the idea is that you translate something to be accessible for everybody, so that it's there's a use of color coding, certain text fonts, infographics, that sort of thing. So I guess, you know, I'm coming from the perspective in that, like you were saying, Mary, is there talk, and also Leah, and instead of having the person they need an accommodation, it would be a systems change in making the classroom more accessible for everyone, so that more people can be included.
Yeah, universal design for learning.
Yeah.
Is that, the overarching piece, but this side of the state's a little bit slower than
They're getting there slowly. I'm in and out of 15 schools this semester, and some of the redos that are going on, I'm really impressed with, but I don't think it's quite there yet.
I think the areas having maybe the most where accommodations are being more universal is in the occupational therapy, where they are doing more brain gym whole class. I see that happening quite a bit, or activities opening up for more physical movement in class.
And I'm seeing teachers with microphones and the speaker
Teachers
system.
have microphones.
And
Yes.
there's carpeting and acoustic tile.
Yes.
Which is, when I walk into some classrooms, I'm going, ah!
Yeah.
And when I walk into those classrooms, I'm going, I could learn here.
Yeah.
And the visual literacy, research and movements and pieces of that are coming too, but as far as in this area in particular, I hear much less about it than in other areas. I think we're still moving towards away from the fear that if you stop focusing on literacy as only text, that somehow you've really done someone a disservice. So, that concept of literacy is a little bit more than just text sometimes, is a newer concept. As far as that's my opinion.
And from what I can see, children are already using it. Children are already using infographics.
iPad.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, way back when, MySpace. So it's you almost have to do an end around to teach them where they are. I mean, 'cause they can figure out how to use a computer.
Yeah, the council in Lansing's like, no, people, all the constituents with developmental disabilities, they don't know how to use a computer, technology's very hard, they can't learn it. And they're all following me on Twitter, and we're tweeting back and forth. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, Twitter? I'm like, are you on Twitter? We're not on Twitter. You're scared? Like, they're on Twitter?
Best place for a struggling speller. Are you kidding? It's the world of text and Twitter.
Yeah.
Because who cares if you don't spell it right? Because you're probably not supposed to.
It's short, you know?
Right, it's very, very short. I love Twitter.
Yeah.
During the state of the country address, I was tweeting with like 4 or 5 people, and on the speech at the same time. But it was lovely to me because I was able to say what I thought about that speech or that part of it or that sentence or that person all at the same time. That was marvelous. Now if I had to sit there and be still and be quiet and pay attention, you know.
ADHD, I got
Shuts
you.
up a whole other part of your brain, doesn't it?
Right. And it's, I had more people like retweet me and favor what I said than I would have ever, sitting still and being quiet.
There's a lot of research going on right now at the university level in the field of new literacies. And so it hasn't trickled down in terms of what all this means, but capturing some of these, Second Life, different types of virtual experiences, technology driven, to see how we could capture those for different types of learners and bring them into the school setting better. So it hasn't come down, but there's a lot of work being done in new literacies, if you look it up in the research.
Yeah, well, I mean, the question was like, cause I'm not part of the school system, so like, is there any talk at all about these ideas? And, is the research even hitting that? But it seems like no.
No, as long as you have these high stakes tests and you have this curriculum driven kind of approach, we were really headed that way in the early 90s, and I was in the university at that point, and so we were doing a lot of work with generating student interests and really adapting curriculum and things from that. And then it's like the brakes slammed on as high stakes assessments became this and this universal curriculum and all this kind of stuff. All the developmental pieces just kind of stopped being talked about. And so until we start making that shift again, right now schools are I think they're under way too much pressure to even entertain a lot of that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think it's too much politics in education.
Yeah, I'm outside of the education, but that's
it's too much politics.
Okay, Michael, you had a question.
Zach, actually.
I didn't find a Zach on the list. Oh, there.
It's a handwritten one.
Okay, Zach, you had a question.
Sure, I could share it. I was curious, even when we humanize labeling, as several of you have spoken about, reversing the paradigm and putting the person first, often a label still ends up being a negative label. We're labeling somebody with a condition of some sort or a disability of some sort. And I'm sure that people carry that with them throughout their life. And I'm wondering how you might recommend that when if we're ever working with parents who are helping them to reset goals for their kids, or if we're helping work with school systems or any groups that might be working with young people and adults, how can we mitigate the negative effects of the labeling in ways that help the client live a life free of that, if possible?
Who wants to?
Well, for me, it depends on the person I'm working with, because I have some clients and students that come to me, and the label is the freeing thing. I'm not dumb. My brain is functioning this way. And for me, dyslexia, if you're just looking at that particular sub-piece of learning disabilities, that is not, again, going back to Merriam-Wolf's research, they're showing the brain signals are traveling in a different way because this brain is structured differently. It's not a disabled brain. It's just really good at things that don't happen to be our print world focused schools and society right now. And she uses examples about the fact that these were the superstars when we were the pioneers and they're going out west and they need to look and see where's the place to put the town. Well, a person with a dyslexic type of brain with processes information that way would be the one saying right there, because they can figure out and see what, you know, the lay of the land is and what was going to be most beneficial and synthesize that. We don't have a society like that at this point.
No.
And we're a very print-driven society and a very print-driven school system and visual, you know, print-driven type of thing. So it's unfortunate. For some people that is a freeing thing. There's nothing wrong with me. I have a different kind of brain. It doesn't fit school very well. Let's go from there. For others, it's very debilitating, and we wouldn't use that with them because it is something that becomes a very negative connotation, so it's really hard to give a blanket response to that because I have so many different reactions in my years of experience.
Joy or Denise or Amy?
We've always found, as far as for parents and individuals, it's very similar to the grief process. So, and everyone's at a different level of that grief process before they can get to acceptance, and it changes periodically. So, generally, in responding to it with an individual or a parent or whomever, there's usually two ways you can kind of go. One is to make that analogy, you know, that big idea, kind of here's how it works. And then the other one is that straight up, if you don't have the label, you don't have the rights. It's just straight up. So, you know, to be able to prove to someone else in the society that you deserve certain things that other people don't, you know, automatically get, you have to have the label. You know, the analogy piece, there's a lot of different ones. Some of them, you know, it's like a car engine. They all run a little bit differently. Depends on, you know, the type of gas you put in it today versus last week, if your oil is low, or if it's a stick shift or an automatic. You know, and sometimes that's the difference, is you have to know really, if you're driving a stick, you have to know how to drive that car. If you're driving an automatic, truthfully, my 5-year-old could accidentally drive my car. So, you know, in the brain is somewhat similar. There's a lot of different literature and studies as far as that talk about resiliency, especially right now, and kids being resilient and the language that's used around them, and that tends to be a good area to be able to look for some of those resources.
I don't have a name for, what's your name?
Oh, my name's Eva.
Okay.
Yep. I was just gonna say that along with that, there are a lot of groups around Michigan and also in Grand Rapids that are disability advocate groups. So it's actually celebrating disability, her pride, her power. So I think connecting those adults to the websites that talk about what the disability movement looks like right now and how it's a positive thing. And it's funny that we say people with disabilities, because the reclaiming of that is saying I'm disabled as an empowering term. So yeah, but that's like in language, right? I wouldn't go and be like, you're disabled. I can say I'm disabled because I have disabilities. So I think connecting, and I can give you my card, I have all those different websites, but because I work at one. But on the other hand of that, I would also agree that yeah, every disability, I resonated with the grieving process, whereas I didn't have any grieving with my disabilities. It was just coming to understand how society was labeling how I operate, and how to navigate how I talk about that. My wife has multiple sclerosis, so with her, it is a grieving process, and with me, it is a grieving process, because there's loss of function, and it's, you know, cane, wheelchair, the power chair. So it's for me, it's very positive, but in my relationship and her disability is not as celebrated, but it doesn't mean that it should not be talked about, and shouldn't be recognized.
Okay. The three of you, any comments?
Just appreciate getting some insight into this. You know, it's a huge concept, and it's very helpful to hear your expertise, even though it seems like the time just got started, and I'm disappointed that we don't have it.
Because indeed my clock now says 5 o'clock. So I think instead of saying thank you you for a wonderful afternoon. I'm going to say thank you for getting us started in this discussion. Libby, can we continue this?
I believe so. I will pass along to Lindsay. And yes.
So if the panel is willing, and if you all want to come back and bring friends.
That's great.
So thank you one and all. Do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you all for coming. If you haven't signed in, I think we caught everybody, but make sure to sign in, take some materials on your way out. Thanks for coming.
And thank you for the Encourage Center hosting.
Yes, thank you for our wonderful hosts and for our panelists.